Clara Bennett stared at the empty road. The last supply wagon, nothing but a distant cloud of dust disappearing into the horizon. The 24-year-old nurse's legs trembled beneath her as the terrible truth sank in. They weren't coming back. The autumn wind howled across the Colorado Territory, whipping her auburn hair across her tear-streaked face. She was alone, completely alone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. We can't risk bringing this back to Fort Collins. You're already infected. You're as good as dead anyway. The last cruel words from Dr. Harrison still rang in her ears as he'd shoved her medical bag into her arms before ordering the wagons to depart, leaving his former nurse to the mercy of the ravaged village and the disease that had decimated it. But something burned beneath Clara's fear. A spark the doctor's betrayal hadn't managed to extinguish. She would survive. She had to. What Clara couldn't possibly know was that she wasn't as alone as she thought. From the shadow of a distant ridge, dark, watchful eyes had observed everything. Clara's knees hit the hard-packed earth as the wagons disappeared over the horizon. She didn't cry out, wouldn't give them the satisfaction even if they were too far to hear. Her medical uniform did little against the October chill sweeping across the Colorado plains. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from a rage so deep it seemed to burn from within. "Useless risk to personnel," Dr. Harrison had growled, his breath heavy with whiskey, as he'd ordered the evacuation. The army can't afford to lose an entire medical unit to a native outbreak. Just 3 days into what was supposed to be a humanitarian mission to treat a smallpox outbreak at the Arapaho settlement of River Bend, Clara had discovered the red welts on her own arm. She had been meticulous with her protective measures, but the disease was unforgiving. It only took one mistake. When Dr. Harrison saw the marks, his face had hardened with a coldness that still chilled her. 2 years of working together through cholera in Kansas City, tuberculosis outbreaks in mining camps, and battlefield wounds from skirmishes with resistant tribes, none of it had mattered. He'd ordered her immediate quarantine, then decided that even that was too risky. Better to abandon one nurse than endanger the entire unit. A practical decision, he'd called it. Clara rose shakily to her feet, surveying her surroundings. The Arapaho settlement stretched before her, unnaturally quiet. What had once been a vibrant community of nearly 100 souls was now a ghost town. Only the weakest remained, the very old, the very young, and those too sick to travel when the healthy members of the tribe had fled the disease weeks earlier. 3 days had been enough time to witness the devastation smallpox wrought. The distinctive pustules, the delirious fevers, the agonizing deaths. She'd treated 12 patients and already lost 8. The remaining 4 were unlikely to see the next sunrise. And now her own skin carried the first marks of the disease that killed 3 out of every 4 victims. To the west, dark clouds gathered, promising a storm before nightfall. A line of cottonwood trees marked a stream to the north, while to the south, rocky outcroppings jutted from the earth like the ancient bones of sleeping giants. Clara knew she needed to think practically. Water first, then shelter. The basics of survival hadn't changed just because her world had shattered, one foot in front of the other, one breath after another. The sky darkened rapidly as she trudged. Toward the stream, each step harder than the last. The weight of her situation pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. 24 years old and cast aside. She'd defied her wealthy Boston family to become a nurse, endured their cutting disapproval when she'd volunteered to serve in the Western Territories. "You'll die of dysentery or an Indian arrow," her father had warned with cruel satisfaction. Now it seemed he would be partially right, though not in the way he'd imagined. The rain fell harder now, soaking through her clothes, plastering her hair to her skull. The stream had grown from a gentle trickle to a churning torrent, swollen. With sudden rainwater, there would be no crossing tonight. Clara crouched beneath the largest cottonwood, its branches offering meager shelter from the downpour. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped precipitously. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably, her limbs growing numb. The wool of her nurse's uniform clung to her skin like a death shroud. She wouldn't survive the night like this, not without fire, not without shelter. She forced herself to her feet, gathering fallen branches with trembling hands. Her training included basic survival skills. Nurses on the frontier needed to be prepared for anything, but everything was soaked through. Still, she had to try. She cleared a space beneath the tree where the ground remained somewhat dry and arranged the driest sticks she could find. From her medical bag, she withdrew her small emergency kit. Bandages, laudanum, quinine, and most precious of all, matches wrapped in oilcloth that might have stayed dry. Clara's fingers were so cold she could barely grip the match, but desperation drove her forward. Spark after spark fell uselessly onto the damp wood. A sob of frustration tore from her throat. The sound terrified her. It was the cry of someone giving up. "I won't die here," she whispered fiercely. "I won't give up like this." Thunder rumbled overhead, closer now, and lightning split the sky. In that brief illumination, Clara spotted a hollow at the base of the largest cottonwood, half hidden by exposed roots. She scrambled toward it, pushing aside decades of accumulated leaves and debris. It wasn't much, barely large enough for her to curl into, but it was drier than the open ground. Clara squeezed into the space, hugging her knees to her chest. The rain continued its assault, but less reached her here. She would survive the night. She had to. The hours passed in a blur of cold and fear. Every snapping twig became a wolf's footfall. Every rustling leaf transformed into a rattlesnake. The darkness played cruel tricks, conjuring Dr. Harrison's sneering face in the shadows. Worse still were the visions of her patients, the young Arapaho mother, who had died clutching her infant to her chest, both their faces ravaged by pustules. The ancient medicine woman, who had looked at Clara with knowing eyes before drawing her final breath. "The land remembers," the old woman had whispered through cracked lips before she died. "It remembers kindness and cruelty alike." Clara wondered what the land would remember of her if she died here tonight. Just another white healer who had failed, another Easterner devoured by the merciless reality of westward expansion. Dawn arrived with grudging reluctance, the storm clouds retreating, but not dispersing entirely. Clara crawled from her makeshift shelter, every muscle screaming in protest. Her uniform was still damp, her hair a wild tangle, but she had survived the night. Small victory though it was, she clung to it fiercely. The stream had receded somewhat, though it still flowed swiftly and brown with silt. Clara knelt at its edge, cupping the cold water in her hands and drinking deeply. Her stomach growled in protest, reminding her that water alone wouldn't sustain her for long. She glanced around desperately, trying to recall her basic training about wild foods. The berries were mostly gone by October, but there might be roots, nuts, anything to quiet the gnawing emptiness inside her. She spotted a cluster of what looked like wild onions growing near the water's edge and dug them up eagerly, brushing away the dirt before biting into one. The sharp taste flooded her mouth, bringing tears to her eyes, but quieting her stomach's complaints momentarily. The question of what to do next loomed large. The nearest settlement, Fort Collins, lay 40 miles east, at least 4 days walking. In her weakened state, Dr. Harrison would be there, drinking away whatever guilt he might feel, if any. Clara had no desire to face him, or the pity, or worse, the fear of the other medical personnel. To the west lay only wilderness, the territories where various tribes still roamed, despite the government's best efforts to confine them to reservations. The Cheyenne were said to be particularly resistant to encroachment, and tales of their raids haunted many a settler's nightmare. Clara's mentor in nursing school had always insisted those stories were exaggerated, fear-mongering to justify the taking of native lands. But even she had warned Clara to be wary of venturing too far from settlements alone. North or south offered no better prospects, just more prairie, more emptiness, more opportunities to die unnoticed and unmourned. Clara's deliberations were interrupted by a sound that froze the blood in her veins, the distant but unmistakable howl of wolves, not close enough to pose an immediate threat, but a stark reminder of her vulnerability. She needed more than a hollow tree if she hoped to survive another night. With renewed urgency, she began gathering materials for a shelter. Fallen branches, river reeds, anything she could drag or carry. Her hands, usually so confident performing delicate medical procedures, soon grew raw and bloody from the labor. Still, she persisted. By midday, she had constructed a crude lean-to against a fallen log, weaving branches and reeds together as she'd been taught in her frontier medicine course. It wasn't much, but it would block the wind and offer some protection from rain and prying eyes alike. The physical activity had warmed her somewhat, but exhaustion pulled at her limbs like lead weights. She hadn't slept more than fitfully during. The storm and the emotional trauma of her abandonment compounded her physical fatigue. Clara crawled into her shelter, intending to rest for just a moment. She woke with a start, heart pounding. The light had changed. The sun hung low in the western sky, painting the prairie in hues of gold and crimson. She'd slept for hours, precious daylight wasted. Worse still, what had woken her was no dream. A twig had snapped nearby, too heavy to be a rabbit or squirrel. Clara held her breath, pressing herself against the back of her shelter. Through the gaps in her crude weaving, she could make out a shape moving along the creek bank. Too small for a bear, too large for a coyote. A human figure. For one wild moment, hope flared in her chest. Had Dr. Harrison returned for her? Had he regretted his cruelty? The hope died as quickly as it had sparked. Alexander Harrison never regretted anything except perhaps recruiting a female nurse whose compassion he'd initially found useful, but grew to resent as frontier medicine hardened him. The figure moved closer, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. Not her former colleague, not any settler she recognized. A man tall and broad-shouldered, with skin burnished by the sun and long black hair adorned with 2 eagle feathers. He wore buckskin leggings and a vest over a loose cotton shirt, a medicine pouch at his hip, and what looked like a bow and arrows slung across his back. Cheyenne. Every terrifying story she'd ever heard rushed back to her: scalping, kidnapping, torture. Her mentor had insisted they were mostly lies, but Clara's fear didn't care about nuance or historical context. She pressed a hand over her mouth to stifle any sound that might escape. The man knelt by the creek, filling a water skin. His movements, deliberate, economical. He scanned the surroundings constantly, alert to any threat. When his gaze swept over her shelter, Clara was certain he'd seen her, but his eyes moved on without pausing. She should stay hidden, wait until he left, and pray he didn't discover her presence. Instead, a violent shiver racked her body, causing the branches of her shelter to rustle audibly. The man spun toward the sound, his hand moving to a knife at his belt in one fluid motion. He approached cautiously, each step silent despite the fallen leaves that should have announced his movement. When he reached her shelter, he paused, head tilted as if listening. "Come out," he said, his English accented but clear. Clara remained, frozen, terror paralyzing her limbs. "I will not ask again," he continued, his voice neither threatening nor kind, simply matter of fact. With trembling limbs, Clara crawled from her hiding place, rising to stand before him. She lifted her chin, determined not to show fear, even as it threatened to choke her. "If you're going to kill me," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "be quick about it." Something flickered across the man's impassive features. Surprise, perhaps, or reluctant admiration for her bravado. He studied her more carefully, his gaze lingering on the medical insignia on her uniform, then moving to her face, which she knew must be showing the early stages of fever. Then his eyes found what they were truly seeking, the telltale red welts on her exposed forearm, the first marks of smallpox. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Why would I kill you, healer woman?" he asked, using a term that startled her with its accuracy. Clara blinked, momentarily thrown by the question. Because that's what I've been told Cheyenne do to white settlers." A sound escaped him. That might have been a laugh, though there was no humor in it. "And white people speak only the truth about my people?" He shook his head. "I am Maheo, medicine man of the northern Cheyenne." The name meant nothing to Clara, but she sensed that acknowledging him properly was important. "I'm Clara Bennett," she said automatically, her years of proper Boston manners surfacing even in this bizarre circumstance. I was a nurse with the Army Medical Corps." He studied her more carefully now, her bedraggled appearance, the dark circles beneath her eyes, the crude shelter that spoke of desperate improvisation rather than knowledge. "Where are your people, Clara Bennett?" he asked. Clara's throat tightened. "Gone," she managed. "Dead." She shook her head. "They left me here yesterday, because of this." She gestured to the telltale marks on her arm. Maheo's expression didn't change, but something hardened in his eyes. "Left you to die," he said, not a question but a statement of fact. Clara nodded, a single tear escaping despite her best efforts. She dashed it away angrily. "You are hungry," he observed. As if on cue, her stomach growled loudly. The few wild onions she'd eaten hours ago had done little to satisfy her hunger. Without another word, Maheo reached into a pouch at his waist and withdrew a strip of dried meat, offering it to her. Clara hesitated only briefly before accepting it. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Thank you," she said, tearing into the jerky with unladylike enthusiasm. The rich, smoky flavor flooded her mouth, the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. Simply because she was so hungry, Maheo watched her eat, his face unreadable. When she'd finished, he spoke again. "Night comes. Your shelter will not keep wolves away." Clara glanced back at her pathetic lean-to, knowing he was right, but having no alternative to offer. "What is your true name, healer woman?" he asked. "Clara," she replied. "Clara Bennett." He nodded once, as if committing the name to memory. "I am Maheo. It means strange owl." "What does it mean?" Clara asked before she could stop herself, curiosity momentarily overriding caution. "The one who sees in darkness," he replied, gesturing toward the gathering dusk. Though there is little to see now, Clara couldn't argue with that assessment. Nothing about her situation or his, she suspected, invited clarity. Maheo gazed at the darkening sky, then back at Clara. He seemed to be weighing options, making calculations she couldn't begin to fathom. "You will die here," he said finally, his bluntness startling but not surprising. "If not from the spotted sickness, then from cold or hunger, or from wolves or men worse than wolves." Clara swallowed hard. "I know. There is a place," he continued after a moment's silence. 3 days walking, my people's healing grounds. You would not be the first white healer brought there." Hope and fear warred within her. "Why would you help me?" Maheo's expression remained impassive, but something ancient and sorrowful flickered in his dark eyes. "The land remembers," he said simply. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The dying medicine woman's words from this stranger's mouth. It couldn't be a coincidence. It had to be a sign. She took a deep breath, weighing her options. Stay and face. Certain death or follow this stranger into an unknown future. When she looked at it that way, the choice was clear. "I'll go with you," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Maheo nodded once, as if he'd expected no other answer. "We leave now. Night makes good cover." The prairie darkness enveloped Clara and Maheo as they moved silently through the tall grass. Stars pierced the night sky like pinpricks in black velvet, offering just enough light to navigate by. Clara struggled to keep pace with Maheo's long strides, her city-bred legs unused to traversing such terrain, especially in darkness. "We must reach the ridge before dawn," Maheo said, gesturing toward a shadowy outline in the distance. "Army patrols ride these lands when light comes." Clara nodded, though her entire body screamed for rest. Her sturdy nurse's boots, appropriate for hospital rounds, but ill-equipped for wilderness travel, had already begun to rub blisters on her heels. Each step sent jolts of pain up her legs, but she bit her lip and pressed forward. Complaining wouldn't help her survive. "My mentor said the army had pushed all the tribes onto reservations," Clara ventured after a long silence. She claimed there weren't any free natives left in Colorado. Maheo's expression remained unreadable in the darkness. "Your mentor knows as much about my people as I know about Boston tea parties." The reference startled her. "How do you know I'm from Boston?" "Your speech, your hands." He glanced at her briefly. "Too soft for a frontier-born." Clara looked down at her hands, pale against the dark prairie grass. Her mother had been proud of those hands and had insisted Clara maintain the appearance of a proper Bostonian lady, even as she rebelled by pursuing nursing. "My father is a shipping merchant," Clara explained, unsure why she felt compelled to share this with a stranger. "He expected me to marry into another merchant family, not become a nurse on the frontier." Maheo acknowledged this with a slight nod. "Knowledge is good," he said, "but knowledge alone won't keep you alive here." As if to emphasize his point, a coyote howled in the distance, answered by another close call. Clara instinctively moved nearer to Maheo, who had stopped to listen. "They hunt far from us," he said after a moment, "but we move faster now." Clara's legs trembled with exhaustion, but she forced herself forward with renewed determination. The coyotes were just one of countless threats in this unforgiving landscape, threats Maheo seemed to navigate with instinctive ease. They walked for what felt like hours, the silence broken only by the whisper of grass against their legs and the occasional nightbird's call. Clara's mind, desperate for distraction from her physical discomfort, turned to practical concerns. "Where exactly are we going?" she asked. 3 days northeast," Maheo replied. "The healing grounds lie where Thunder Creek meets the stone cliffs. My people gather there when sickness comes. Your people, the Cheyenne. I've never treated any of your tribe before." "Few white healers have," he said. "It is why we survive. Better to be forgotten than remembered by those who would destroy us." Clara absorbed this, connecting it to whispered conversations she'd overheard between senior medical officers. Her mentor in nursing school had argued against army policies, citing the government's broken treaties and violent campaigns against native peoples. Dr. Harrison had dismissed these concerns as women's sentimentality. "Are there others like me there? Other outsiders?" Clara searched for the right word. Maheo was quiet for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. "One, a man from your medicine school. 5 summers ago, he came to study our healing ways, then chose to stay when he saw the truth of how the army treats the sick among my people." "A doctor? From a medical college?" Clara asked, surprised. "Who?" "David Running River now. Once he was David Carlyle." Clara nearly stumbled in shock. "Dr. David Carlyle? From Harvard Medical School?" Maheo glanced at her. "You know this man?" "Of him," Clara clarified. "He was brilliant, pioneered new surgical techniques during the war. Then he disappeared. The medical community thought he was dead." "To your world, perhaps he is," Maheo said. "To us, he lives and heals." The revelation shifted something in Clara's understanding. A respected Harvard physician had chosen to abandon his prestigious career to live among the Cheyenne. Perhaps this strange new path wasn't as unprecedented as she'd thought. By the time they reached the ridge Maheo had indicated, the eastern sky was lightening to a pearly gray. Clara's legs finally gave out as they entered a small grove of juniper that offered concealment from the plains below. She sank to the ground, muscles trembling, feet bloody within her ruined boots. "Let me see," he said. Embarrassed by the state of her feet but too exhausted to protest, Clara peeled away the leather boots. Her stockings were torn and blood-stained, her feet covered in blisters, some already burst and oozing. Without comment, Maheo withdrew a small pouch from inside his buckskin vest. He opened it to reveal a greenish paste that smelled strongly of herbs and pine. With surprisingly gentle hands for such a formidable man, he applied the salve to her ravaged feet. "What is that?" Clara asked, wincing at the initial sting before. A cooling sensation brought unexpected relief. "Pine resin, yarrow, comfrey," he listed. "Old medicine." "Thank you," she murmured, overcome by the simple kindness after Dr. Harrison's casual cruelty. Maheo merely nodded, finishing his ministrations before retrieving a bundle from his pack. He unwrapped it to reveal strips of dried buffalo meat and what looked like small, dark cakes of some unfamiliar substance. "Eat," he instructed, handing her a portion. "Then rest. We move again when the sun begins falling." Clara accepted the food gratefully. The meat was tough but flavorful, requiring careful chewing. The dark cakes turned out to be a mixture of dried berries and nuts, pressed together with what might have been honey or tree sap. The combination was hearty and surprisingly satisfying. Exhaustion overtook her. Clara realized she should be more afraid, alone in the wilderness with a strange man from a culture she'd been taught to fear. Yet something about Maheo's quiet competence inspired trust rather than dread. He could have left her to die by the creek, could have killed her easily. Instead, he'd shared his food, treated her wounds, and offered a path to survival. "Why did you help me?" she asked sleepily, the question that had been nagging at her since their first encounter. Maheo, who had been keeping watch at the edge of the grove, turned to regard her thoughtfully. "My sister," he said finally, his voice so low she almost didn't hear it. "Spotted sickness took her 2 winters ago. She would be your age now." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken grief. Clara wanted to offer condolences, but Maheo had already turned away, ending the conversation. "Sleep," he said. "Your body needs healing." Despite her racing thoughts, Clara's exhaustion won out. She curled up at the base of a gnarled juniper, using her nurse's cap as a pillow, and fell into a dreamless sleep. She woke to Maheo's hand on her shoulder and the golden light of late afternoon filtering through the trees. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. Where was the hospital tent? Why wasn't Dr. Harrison barking orders? Before reality crashed back like a physical blow, abandoned, rescued, following a Cheyenne medicine man to his healing grounds. "Move now," Maheo said, already gathering his few possessions. Clara sat up, surprised to find her feet significantly less painful than they had been that morning. The slave had worked minor miracles on her blisters. Still, she dreaded putting weight on them again. Noticing her concern, Maheo produced a bundle of soft leather and began fashioning it into simple moccasins, showing her how to wrap and tie them securely around her feet. "These protect better than white women's shoes on the prairie," he explained, "but you must learn to walk differently. Step soft like deer, not hard like buffalo." Clara nodded, absorbing the instruction with the same diligence she'd once applied to her medical training. Learning to walk like a deer seemed a fair exchange for survival. They set out as the sun began its descent, keeping to higher ground where possible. Maheo set a challenging pace, but not the punishing one of the previous night. Occasionally, he would stop to point out landmarks or signs Clara would have missed entirely, a distant smudge of smoke that marked a settler's cabin to avoid, tracks in soft earth that told of a deer herd passing recently, a certain configuration of rocks that indicate good water nearby. You must learn to read the land, he told her. It speaks constantly to those who listen. Clara tried to absorb everything, storing away each lesson like the precious resource it was. If she was to survive in this new reality, she would need skills her Boston upbringing and even her frontier medical experience hadn't provided. As dusk settled fully around them, Maheo led them to a small ravine where a spring bubbled up among rocks. The depression offered protection from both wind and prying eyes, while the fresh water was a welcome discovery after hours of travel. While Clara refilled the water skin he'd given her, Maheo constructed a small, nearly smokeless fire, using techniques that fascinated her. He didn't use matches or a lighter, but instead employed a bow drill that created enough friction to ignite. Tinder he'd collected along their route. "Can you teach me that?" Clara asked, watching intently. Maheo looked up, something like approval flickering in his dark eyes. "Tomorrow, tonight, you will learn this." He showed her how to arrange stones around their small fire to reflect heat inward, how to position herself to benefit most from that heat while keeping watch, and how to distinguish between the sounds of nocturnal animals going about their business and potential threats approaching. "Always sleep with one ear listening," he advised. Even in the safest places, they ate more of the dried meat and fruitcakes, supplemented with tender cress Maheo had gathered from around the spring. The green vegetation was a welcome addition, fresh and peppery on Clara's tongue. As they sat in the growing darkness, the fire casting flickering shadows across the ravine walls, Clara's thoughts turned to what awaited her at the healing grounds. Would she be welcomed or merely tolerated? Would she ever truly belong among people so different from everything she'd known? "The others at your healing grounds," she began hesitantly. "Will they accept me?" Maheo considered this, poking at the fire with a stick. "Some will welcome you. Some will watch and wait. Some may never accept." He looked directly at her. "This is true for all people, yes?" Clara thought of Fort Collins, how the other nurses had never truly accepted her despite her credentials, how they'd whispered about the Boston princess playing frontier nurse when they thought she couldn't hear, how quickly they'd stood aside when Dr. Harrison had ordered her abandonment. "Yes," she agreed softly. "People are the same everywhere, I suppose." "People, yes," Maheo nodded, "but ways of living are not the same. Our ways will be strange to you, hard sometimes. Harder than watching patients die while my colleagues flee?" Clara asked, a bitterness she'd never voiced aloud surfacing suddenly. "Harder than being abandoned to die alone?" The questions hung in the air, unanswerable. Maheo was silent for a long moment. "Your heart carries many wounds," he said finally. "Some fresh, some old. This is good." "Good?" Clara echoed incredulously. "Wounds teach us where we are weak, where we need strengthening," he explained. "Without wounds, we learn nothing important." Clara hadn't considered this perspective before. Her medical training had always focused on healing wounds, not learning from them. The idea of acknowledging pain, rather than simply treating it, was strangely liberating. Their conversation was interrupted by a distant sound, the unmistakable crack of a rifle shot echoing across the prairie. Maheo was instantly alert, extinguishing their small fire with a handful of dirt. "Someone hunts at night," he said, his voice low and tense. "This is not good." Clara's pulse quickened. Dr. Harrison, perhaps, or army patrols? Maheo gathered their few possessions with swift efficiency. We move now. Stay low, step quiet. They left the ravine, keeping to shadows and dips in the land. The moon had risen, casting enough light to navigate by, but also enough to expose them if they weren't careful. Clara concentrated on placing each foot as Maheo had taught her, toe first, then heel, rolling rather than stomping. Another shot. Rang out closer this time. Maheo pulled Clara into the shadow of a large boulder, his hand firm but gentle on her shoulder. "Listen," he whispered. Clara strained her ears, detecting what Maheo had already heard. Voices carried on the night air. Male voices, rough with drink and something darker. Couldn't have gotten far, someone said. Harrison said she'd be delirious by now, easy to track. Worth good money at the fort if we find her first, another voice added. Army's offering a reward for the nurse, dead or alive. Clara's blood ran cold. Not just Dr. Harrison himself, but men he'd sent, men looking not to rescue but to capture her, perhaps to kill her. Maheo's expression hardened as he too made sense of the fragments floating toward them. Without a word, he pointed to a dense patch of tall grass 30 yards away. Clara nodded her understanding, their next cover point. They moved in perfect silence, Clara mimicking Maheo's low crouch and deliberate movements. The voices grew fainter, as they put distance between themselves and the hunters, but Clara's fear didn't subside. How many men were searching for her? How far would they track her? When they'd traveled for nearly an hour without hearing further sounds of pursuit, Maheo finally allowed them to rest in a small depression beneath an overhanging embankment. Clara sank to the ground, her nerves frayed, legs trembling from exertion. And fear. "They were looking for me," she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Men who see healers as property to be owned," Maheo confirmed, his voice tight with controlled anger. "This disease infects many white men's hearts." "What will we do if they find us?" Clara asked, voicing her deepest fear. Maheo's hand moved. To the knife at his belt, his meaning clear. "They will not take you." The simple declaration carried more weight than elaborate promises of protection might have. Clara believed him completely. Whatever his reasons for helping her, whether memory of his lost sister or some personal code of honor, Maheo would not abandon her as Dr. Harrison had done. "We cannot travel on the open prairie now," he decided after studying the sky. "Too exposed. Too easy to track. We go north first through broken lands, then east to healing grounds." "Is that longer?" 3 days becomes 5, maybe 6, Maheo acknowledged. "But better alive in 6 days than dead in 3. Clara couldn't argue. With that logic, she nodded her agreement, trying to project more confidence than she felt. The revelation that men were actively hunting her had shaken her deeply, transforming her journey from desperate survival to active flight. "You should sleep," Maheo advised. "I will watch. Tomorrow brings a harder path." Though she doubted sleep would come easily, with the hunters' voices still echoing in her mind, Clara knew she needed rest. She curled into the smallest possible space against the embankment, drawing her knees to her chest. "Maheo," she whispered, as he took up position at the edge of their shelter. "Thank you for everything." He glanced back at her, his expression softening slightly. "Sleep now, Clara Bennett. Tomorrow you begin to learn how not to need thanks." As she drifted into uneasy slumber, Clara wondered what he meant. Not needing thanks seemed impossible. Every aspect of her survival now depended on this man's knowledge and protection. Yet something in his tone suggested he didn't see their relationship as one of rescuer and rescued, but as something more balanced, more reciprocal. Perhaps in the days to come, she would discover what that might mean. For now, she surrendered to exhaustion, dreaming of dear soft footsteps and hands strong enough to protect, but gentle enough to heal. Dawn painted the broken landscape in pale gold as Clara and Maheo traversed the rocky terrain. The rolling hills and limestone outcroppings formed a natural maze, harder to navigate but offering concealment from the men hunting them. Clara's muscles ached from the previous day's journey, but the buckskin moccasins Maheo had crafted protected her feet far better than her ruined boots had. This was Ute land once, Maheo said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since waking. Before government men came with papers and promises. Clara absorbed this information, connecting it to fragmentary lessons from her schooling. The Colorado Territory had been named for the Colorado River, but she'd never considered where the native peoples had gone when settlers arrived. What happened to them? Pushed south to reservation lands. Some died fighting. More died from white man's diseases. He pointed to a distant ridge. They built prayer circles there on high places. Some still stand. Clara squinted at the ridge, seeing nothing but rocks and scrub vegetation. She was learning that Maheo perceived things invisible to her untrained eyes, subtle signs and markers that told the history of the land they traversed. My people once traded with Ute, Maheo continued. Now we share the same enemies, the same sorrows. Is that why you live free instead of on a reservation? Clara asked. Because you're different tribes working together. Maheo's expression revealed nothing, but he nodded slightly. Small bands, different peoples, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Kiowa, Ute, even some Pawnee and Osage. We survive because we are few, because we move with the seasons, because we do not fight the bluecoats directly. This revelation fascinated Clara. Dr. Harrison and other medical officers spoke of Indians as if they were a single entity, ignoring the complex relationships between diverse nations. Yet here was Maheo describing an alliance of necessity among peoples who had once been enemies. At the healing grounds, are all these different tribes there? Yes, different tongues, different ways. But we found peace among ourselves. Maheo's voice carried a hint of pride. This is the true strength white men never see. They traveled in companionable silence for several miles, Maheo occasionally pointing out useful plants or explaining how to navigate by sun position. Clara absorbed every lesson, determined to become less of a burden. By midday, they'd reached a natural arch of limestone overlooking a small spring-fed pool. We rest here, Maheo decided, surveying the surroundings with approval. Good water, good position to see without being seen. Clara sank gratefully onto a sun-warmed rock, muscles trembling with exertion. Though she'd grown stronger during their journey, the pace and terrain still tested her limits. Maheo seemed tireless in comparison, moving across the landscape with the same easy grace regardless of obstacles. While Clara refilled their water skin at the spring, Maheo constructed a small snare using twine from his pack and a flexible sapling. He set it near a game trail leading to the water, explaining each step of the process. Tonight we eat fresh meat, he said, better than dried for regaining strength. The prospect of hot food made Clara's mouth water. They'd subsisted on dried provisions since leaving the creek, and while nourishing, they left much to be desired in terms of flavor and satisfaction. As Clara watched Maheo work, a question that had lingered since their first encounter resurfaced. You speak English very well, better than most settlers even. How did you learn? Maheo's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their task. I lived among white men for a time, before the war between states. You lived in a settlement. Clara couldn't mask her surprise. No, a school in Pennsylvania. His voice took on a distant quality. Christian men thought they could save Indian souls by teaching Indian children white ways. Clara tried to imagine Maheo, formidable, self-sufficient Maheo, confined to a schoolroom, forced into white clothing, made to recite lessons. The image refused to form. What happened? 5 winters I stayed, learned reading, writing, and numbers. His mouth curved in something not quite a smile. Learned how white men think, what they value, what they fear. Then I returned to my people. There was clearly more to the story, but Maheo had already shared more of his past than at any previous point in their journey. Clara sensed pressing further would only result in renewed silence. "I'm glad you learned English," she said instead. "Otherwise we couldn't talk, and I'd be even more useless out here." Maheo glanced at her, something softening in his expression. "You are learning. This is not useless." The simple affirmation warmed Clara more than she'd expected. Coming from Maheo, who measured his words as carefully as he rationed provisions, the acknowledgement of her progress felt significant. Their peaceful rest was shattered by the distant but unmistakable sound of voices, men's voices carried on the wind from somewhere to the south. Maheo was instantly alert, signaling Clara to remain still while he climbed the limestone arch for a better vantage point. Clara's heart pounded as she waited, fear returning like a physical presence pressing against her chest. Were the hunters still tracking them? Had they somehow picked up their trail despite Maheo's precautions? Maheo descended swiftly, his expression grim. 4 men, armed, moving this way. The same ones from before, cannot tell. Too far. He gathered their few possessions with swift efficiency. "We move now. Leave no signs." They abandoned the spring, Maheo taking a moment to dismantle his snare and obscure their footprints with a branch. Clara followed his example, careful to leave no evidence of their presence as they retreated northward into increasingly rugged terrain. The limestone formations grew more pronounced, creating a labyrinth of narrow passages and hidden alcoves. Maheo led them through this natural maze with unerring confidence, though how he maintained his sense of direction among the identical-looking rocks bewildered Clara. "How do you know where we're going?" she whispered as they paused in the shadow of a towering formation. "Sun, moss, wind." Maheo pointed to subtle markers she'd overlooked. "The land speaks if you listen." Their path grew steeper, the rocky ground unstable underfoot. Clara struggled to maintain footing on loose scree, her progress slowing despite her best efforts. When she slipped for the 3rd time, skinning her palm on rough stone, Maheo stopped abruptly. "This way is too slow," he decided, scanning the terrain ahead. "We need higher ground. Better sight." He pointed to a narrow fissure in the cliff face, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. There, shelter and vantage point. The climb was arduous, requiring Clara to use hand and footholds Maheo indicated. By the time they reached the fissure, her arms trembled with exertion, and her breath came in sharp gasps. Maheo helped her navigate the final scramble into what proved to be a shallow cave, concealed from below by overhanging rock. From this position, they could observe much of the terrain they'd traversed, while remaining virtually invisible to anyone searching below. Maheo positioned himself at the cave mouth, eyes fixed on the maze of rocks they'd just navigated. "What if they track us here?" Clara asked, voicing her deepest fear. "They must first find our trail," Maheo replied. "We left little to follow. But if they come—" His hand moved to the knife at his belt, a gesture that had become familiar in its reassurance. Hours passed in tense silence. Occasionally, they caught distant sounds of movement or voices, but the hunters, if they were the same men from before, seemed to be searching a wider area rather than following a specific trail. As afternoon shadows lengthened into evening, the sounds grew fainter, eventually disappearing entirely. They search blind, Maheo concluded, relaxing his vigilant posture slightly. Good. Clara released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Will they give up? Not if there is money to be made, Maheo said pragmatically. But they cannot. Search forever. They need supplies, shelter. We will stay here tonight, move at first light. The cave, while secure, offered little comfort. The stone floor was unyielding, and the narrow space prevented them from building even a small fire for warmth. They ate the last of Maheo's dried provisions in silence, both aware that they'd need to replenish their food supplies soon. As darkness fell, bringing with it a sharp drop in temperature, Clara huddled against the cave wall, wrapping her arms tightly around her shoulders. The October nights were growing colder, and her nurse's uniform offered minimal protection. Noticing her discomfort, Maheo unfolded a small hide blanket from his pack and offered it to her. When Clara hesitated, he simply placed it around her shoulders before returning to his position at the cave entrance. "You should sleep," he advised. "Tomorrow will be difficult." Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Her mind raced with worries about the men hunting her, about the increasingly harsh conditions, about the uncertain reception awaiting her at the healing grounds. She was also acutely aware of the small red pustules forming on her arms, the smallpox progressing, though more slowly than she would have expected. Eventually, she voiced the question that troubled her most. "Maheo, what will happen when we reach your healing grounds? What will I be there for? A guest, a prisoner, a burden?" In the darkness, she couldn't see his expression, but his silence spoke volumes. When he finally answered, his voice was measured, each word carefully chosen. "You will be what you make yourself. Nothing is given freely among my people, not food, not shelter, not belonging. Each person contributes according to their abilities. But what can I contribute?" Clara asked the question that had plagued her since they began their journey. "I know nothing useful for survival." "You know healing," Maheo pointed out. "Knowledge has value, and you can learn other skills. Will they give me the chance to learn, to prove myself? Some will, some will not." Maheo's honesty was unflinching. "There is no promise of easy acceptance, but there is a promise of fair judgment. Based on what you do, not where you came from." Clara considered this. It wasn't a comfortable answer, but it was a fair one, more fair perhaps than she might have received in a settler community where her association with Dr. Harrison would have marked her permanently. "I can learn," she said with quiet determination. "I want to learn." Maheo made a sound that might have been approved. "Then sleep. Learning begins with strength, and strength begins with rest." This time exhaustion overcame anxiety, and Clara drifted into dreamless sleep, the hide blanket wrapped securely around her shoulders. She woke to grey dawn light filtering through the cave entrance, and the disorienting awareness that she was alone. Maheo's pack remained where he'd left it, but the man himself was gone. Clara sat up, panic flickering at the edges of her consciousness. Had he abandoned her, as Dr. Harrison had done? Before the fear could fully form, she heard movement at the cave entrance. Maheo appeared, carrying what looked like a small bundle of fur. Without preamble, he set to work preparing their breakfast. A rabbit he'd somehow caught and killed in the early dawn hours. "You're still here," Clara said before she could stop herself. Maheo looked up from his task, something like puzzlement crossing his features. "Where else would I be?" The simple question dispelled her momentary fear. Of course, he hadn't abandoned her, not after all they'd been through, not after risking his life to protect her from the hunters. Shame at her doubt washed through her, followed by a deeper shame at how quickly she'd expected betrayal. "I just thought, when I woke up alone." She couldn't finish the sentence. Understanding dawned in Maheo's eyes. "You thought I left, like your doctor?" Clara nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "Clara Bennett," Maheo said, his use of her full name, drawing her attention. "I will not leave you until you are safe with my people. This is my word." The solemn promise hung in the air between them, a tangible thing of weight and substance. Clara nodded, wordless gratitude tightening her throat. They ate in silence, the fresh meat replenishing their strength for the journey ahead. As Maheo packed the remaining rabbit for later, Clara ventured a question that had been forming since their conversation the previous night. "How did you learn to survive out here? Was it always your way, or did you have to learn, like I'm learning?" Maheo seemed to consider whether to answer, then relented. "Both. My father taught me hunting, tracking, the old ways of our people. Then white man's school tried to make me forget. When I returned, I had to learn again what had been beaten out of me." Clara absorbed this, connecting it to her own experience, the proper Boston upbringing her parents had insisted upon, so at odds with the harsh realities of frontier medicine. "It's like having to learn everything twice," she said softly. "First one way, then another completely different way." Maheo nodded, something like recognition flickering in his eyes. "Yes, this is why you learn faster than expected. Your mind already knows how to learn new ways." It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd offered, and Clara treasured it silently as they prepared to leave their temporary shelter. The day's journey took them deeper into terrain few settlers ever traversed, a realm of sheer cliff faces, hidden valleys, and ancient rock formations shaped by wind and water into fantastic sculptures. Clara found herself oddly at home in this alien landscape, as if its very foreignness matched her internal sense of displacement. By midday, they'd reached what Maheo called the backbone, a long ridge of exposed limestone running north to south like the spine of some enormous buried creature. From this vantage point, they could see miles in every direction, the prairies stretching like a golden sea to the east, more broken lands to the west. "No sign of hunters," Maheo noted with satisfaction. "They have moved south. The news should have brought relief." But Clara felt only weariness. Each new threat avoided seemed to sap more of her dwindling reserves rather than replenishing them. The constant vigilance, the physical demands of their journey, the emotional toll of her abandonment, all combined into a weight that pressed heavier with each passing day. Maheo, observant as always, noticed her faltering steps. Without comment, he called for a longer rest than they'd previously taken, finding a sheltered spot beneath an overhanging ledge where a tiny spring seeped from the rock face. "Drink," he instructed. "Water here is special, gives strength." Clara cupped her hands beneath the trickle, the water cold and startlingly sweet on her tongue. Whether from actual mineral properties or simply the power of suggestion, she did feel somewhat revived after drinking. As they rested in the dappled shade, Maheo withdrew a small object from a pouch at his waist, a bone whistle intricately carved with symbols Clara didn't recognize. Without explanation, he put it to his lips and blew a series of 3 short notes, barely audible to Clara's ears. "What's that for?" she asked when he'd finished. "Letting friends know we come," Maheo replied, tucking the whistle away. "Friends," Clara echoed, suddenly alert. "There are others nearby." "Always others," Maheo said cryptically. "Eyes that watch, ears that listen. My people do not travel alone in these lands." The revelation that they might have been observed throughout their journey was both unsettling and reassuring. Had these unseen watchers been assessing her as well as tracking their progress? Had they reported back to the healing grounds about the white nurse traveling with Maheo? Before she could voice these questions, a shadow passed overhead, a hawk, circling on the thermals rising from the sun-warmed rocks. Maheo watched it with unusual intensity, then nodded as if confirming something to himself. "We changed direction," he announced. "East now, not north." "Why?" Clara asked, confused by the sudden shift in their carefully planned route. "Message comes," he said, gesturing toward the circling hawk. "Safe passage awaits to the east." Clara glanced between Maheo and the hawk, skepticism plain on her face. "The bird told you this?" For the first time in their journey, Maheo smiled, a brief flash of white teeth that transformed his stern features. "No, Clara Bennett. The hawk is not the message. It is the messenger's sign." He pointed to the horizon. "East, 2 miles, crossing." The river. Friends wait with horses. How can you possibly know that from watching a bird? Clara demanded, her Boston rationality rebelling against what seemed like superstition. 3 circles clockwise, wings dipped on the 3rd pass. This is the signal. Maheo spoke with absolute certainty. Come, we must reach the river by sunset. Clara hesitated, reluctant to abandon their established course on such seemingly flimsy evidence. Yet Maheo had proven his judgment sound at every turn of their journey. If he believed help awaited them, perhaps it did. Do you trust these friends? She asked finally. With my life, Maheo replied. And yours. The simple answer decided her. Clara nodded her acceptance, and they set off eastward, descending from the limestone ridge toward the distant glint of water that marked the river's course. As they walked, Clara pondered this mysterious intervention. Who were these unseen allies that could communicate with Maheo through such subtle means? How had they known where to find them? And most importantly, what would their arrival mean for her uncertain future? The answer awaited at the river crossing, for better or worse. The sun hung low in the western sky, painting the river before them in shades of amber and gold. Clara and Maheo paused at the edge of the tree line, surveying the crossing point with cautious eyes. The river itself wasn't wide, perhaps 30 yards across, but the current looked swift, the water darkening toward the center where it ran deepest. I don't see anyone, Clara whispered, scanning the opposite bank. They see us, Maheo replied with quiet confidence. They wait for a certain sign. Without further explanation, he raised his hand in a specific gesture, 3 fingers extended, then 2, then 1, before whistling the same pattern of notes he'd played on the bone whistle earlier. The signal hung in the evening air, seemingly swallowed by the rushing water and sighing breeze. Long seconds passed. Clara held her breath, wondering if Maheo had somehow misinterpreted the hawk's message. Then movement caught her eye. A flash of color among the thick willows on the far bank. A figure emerged, then another, leading horses behind them. Friends, Maheo confirmed, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. The figures, 2 men dressed in a mixture of native and settler clothing, led their horses to the water's edge. One raised his hand in a mirror of Maheo's earlier gesture. Only then did Maheo step from the shelter of the trees, motioning for Clara to follow. The river is too deep for you to cross alone, he explained as they approached the water. They bring horses. Clara eyed the rushing current with trepidation. She'd never learned to swim, a fact that had seemed irrelevant in Boston and remained unaddressed during her nursing career. The prospect of crossing the turbulent water, even on horseback, sent a flutter of panic through her chest. The men on the opposite bank mounted their horses and urged them into the river. The animals entered the water with practiced ease, clearly accustomed to such crossings. As they drew closer, Clara could distinguish the riders more clearly, one older with grey streaking his long black hair, the other younger with a lean, hawk-like face and watchful eyes. Hototo, Maheo greeted the older man as they reached the shallows. Swift river. The older man nodded in acknowledgement, while the younger's eyes fixed on Clara with unconcealed curiosity. They exchanged rapid words in Cheyenne, Maheo's hands, occasionally moving in explanatory gestures. Hototo's expression darkened as the conversation progressed. He spoke sharply, gesturing back the way they'd come. Maheo responded with a calming motion before turning to Clara. You are the one he risks for, he said. The abandoned healer. Clara nodded, unsure how to respond to this direct assessment of her situation. There is little time, Hototo continued, glancing at the setting sun. Bad men follow, cross now, talk later. The news that they were still being pursued sent a jolt of fear through Clara's exhaustion. She'd hoped the hunters had given up, or lost their trail completely. Hototo extended his hand, indicating Clara should mount behind him. With Maheo's help, she managed to climb awkwardly onto the horse's back, clutching the saddle's edge with white-knuckled fingers. Maheo mounted behind. Swift River and both horses turned to re-enter the river's flow. The crossing was terrifying. The current pushed against the horses' legs with visible force, water swirling hip-high around the animals. Clara clung to Hototo's buckskin shirt, eyes squeezed shut as spray soaked her already damp clothing. The horse beneath them struggled against the flow, muscles bunching with effort. When they finally reached the opposite bank, Clara's limbs were trembling, not just from fear, but from the physical effort of maintaining her seat. Maheo and Swift River emerged shortly after, their horse snorting and shaking itself vigorously. "We ride hard now," Hototo announced, not waiting for Clara to recover her composure. "Healing Grounds is a half-day's journey, too far to walk before. Hunters come. How many follow?" Maheo asked, helping Clara adjust her position behind Hototo. Swift River held up 4 fingers. "Same men plus 2 more joined yesterday. They have a tracker from Fort Collins." The news silenced even Maheo momentarily. A military tracker would be far more skilled than the average settler, capable of following signs most would miss entirely. "How close?" Maheo finally asked. "Too close," Hototo replied grimly. "Found your cave shelter this morning, following your trail to the ridge." Clara's stomach clenched. The hunters had been just hours behind them, might have overtaken them entirely, if not for the change in direction suggested by the hawk's message. "The horses will leave clearer tracks," she observed, her city-bred logic asserting itself despite her fear. "Yes," Hototo agreed, "but they also give speed." He exchanged glances with Swift River. "We have plans for tracks." Before Clara could ask what he meant, Hototo clicked his tongue and urged his horse forward. They set off at a brisk trot, following what appeared to be a game trail leading away from the river. Maheo and Swift River fell in behind them, forming a small procession through the gathering dusk. Despite her exhaustion, Clara found herself studying their new companions with fascinated attention. Hototo carried himself with the quiet authority of age and experience, his weather-lined face revealing little emotion, but his eyes missing nothing. Swift River, in contrast, radiated barely contained energy, constantly scanning their surroundings with the heightened awareness of a born scout. They rode without speaking for nearly an hour, putting distance between themselves and the river. Crossing. The terrain changed gradually, the rocky formations giving way to rolling hills covered with prairie grass and scattered stands of oak and cottonwood. In the fading light, Clara could make out distant herds of what might be deer or antelope grazing peacefully, unaware of the human drama unfolding in their midst. When full darkness descended, Hototo finally called a halt beside a small creek fed by an underground spring. The location offered both water and concealment, with a thicket of young trees providing cover from casual observation. "Rest horses," Hototo announced. "Eat quickly, then ride more." As they dismounted, Clara's legs buckled beneath her, unused to horseback travel after days of walking. Maheo caught her elbow, steadying her until she found her balance. "Thank you," she murmured. Embarrassed by her weakness, Maheo nodded acknowledgement before turning to help Hototo with the horses. Swift River, meanwhile, withdrew small bundles of food from his saddlebag, cornmeal cakes mixed with dried berries and strips of smoked venison. He offered a portion to Clara with a quick, evaluating glance, but no words. Clara accepted the food, gratefully, suddenly aware of her gnawing hunger. As she ate, she observed the 3 men conversing in low tones, their discussion punctuated by occasional gestures toward the direction they'd come from. Though she couldn't understand their words, their concern was evident. When Maheo finally joined her by the creek bank, his expression was grave. "The men who hunt you, they are more determined than we thought," he said without preamble. "Because of the reward?" Clara asked, remembering the fragments of conversation they'd overheard nights earlier. Maheo shook his head. not just money. Now, your doctor rides with them. The revelation hit Clara like a physical blow. Dr. Harrison, that's impossible. He wanted to be rid of me. Harrison offers a reward for your return, Maheo said, his voice hard with contempt. Tells people his nurse was stolen by savages. Makes himself a grieving mentor, not a man who abandons a healer. The layers of betrayal stole Clara's breath. Not content with abandoning her to die, Harrison now cast himself as the victim and her rescuer as the villain. The story would be believed without question. A white nurse taken by Indians was a narrative settlers accepted without evidence. How do you know this? She asked, her voice barely audible. Swift River heard in a trading post 2 days ago. Went to listen, not be seen. Your doctor's name was spoken, description of you given, reward promised. Clara's mind raced through the implications. If Harrison was telling such lies, he must have a reason beyond simple reputation saving. What would he gain by having her returned? Then understanding dawned, cold and clear as winter moonlight. The medical board inspection, she said softly. The Army Medical Corps is sending an inspector from Washington. Harrison's records would show he abandoned a nurse during a smallpox outbreak. He'd lose his commission. Maheo's expression confirmed. He'd reached the same conclusion. You are dangerous to him now, witness to be silenced, not healer to be saved. The truth hurt, but not as much as it should have. Clara had long since stopped expecting professional integrity from Alexander Harrison. Still, the calculated cruelty of abandoning her only to hunt her down when his career was threatened cut deeper than she'd anticipated. If they catch us, she began. They will not, Maheo interrupted with quiet certainty. Tonight, we implement Ototo's plan. By morning, hunters will follow a false trail while we reach healing grounds. Before Clara could ask what this plan entailed, Swift River approached, leading all 3 horses. The animals had been unsaddled, their backs bare save for light blankets. Time to move, Hototo announced, joining them with an armful of odd-looking bundles wrapped in hide. Maheo has told you about your doctor. Clara nodded, unable to trust her voice. Hototo's weathered face softened momentarily. I too know men who betray their healing oath. You are not alone in this sorrow. The simple acknowledgement of her pain from this stranger touched Clara unexpectedly. She blinked back sudden tears, determined not to become the helpless victim Harrison believed her to be. What's the plan? She asked, straightening her shoulders. Hototo's approval at her directness was evident. He handed one of the hide bundles to Swift River and motioned for Clara to observe. We make a false trail, he explained. Swift River rides north with all horses, leaving clear tracks for the tracker to follow. He carries these. He held up the remaining bundles, made to look and smell like humans. Clara examined the bundles curiously. Each contained a wooden frame wrapped with hides and clothing, roughly the size and shape of a person when viewed from a distance or in poor light. Decoys, she realized. Yes. Swift River will strap to horses. Ride north many miles, make campfires each night, leave signs of people, draw hunters away. The cleverness of the strategy impressed Clara. The military tracker would undoubtedly follow the clearer horse tracks, especially when reinforced with other signs of human presence. Then how do we reach the healing grounds? She asked. We walk. Maheo stated simply, 3 people leave lighter trails than horses. We take hidden paths, ways known only to my people. The prospect of more walking after days of grueling travel made Clara's muscles ache in anticipation, but she nodded acceptance. The alternative, capture and forced return to Harrison, was unthinkable. Swift River finished securing the decoys to 2 of the horses, arranging them so they resembled riders even in the darkness. He mounted the 3rd horse and gathered the reins of the others, then exchanged brief words with Hototo and Maheo. As he prepared to depart, he looked directly at Clara for the first time. You cause much trouble, White Healer, he said, his English more accented than Hototo's. "But Maheo says you have a strong heart. We will see." With that cryptic assessment, he urged his horse forward, leading the decoy-laden animals north into the darkness. The sound of hoofbeats faded quickly, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the soft gurgle of the creek. "We wait 1 hour," Hototo decided. "Let Swift River get distance. Then we go east through the hidden valley." The hour passed. Intense silence. Clara fought to stay awake, exhaustion pulling at her like quicksand. Maheo noticed her struggle and offered her the last of the cornmeal cakes from his own portion, the simple kindness bringing fresh tears to her eyes. When Hototo finally signaled it was time to move, Clara rose on trembling legs, determined not to slow their progress. Hototo took the lead, setting a pace that was deliberate but steady, clearly mindful of Clara's limitations without explicitly acknowledging them. They traveled through terrain that seemed to shift with each passing mile, from open prairie to dense thicket, from shallow ravines to low rolling hills. Hototo navigated with unwavering confidence, occasionally pausing to murmur brief explanations to Maheo about landmarks visible only to their experienced eyes. Despite her determination, Clara found herself lagging behind as the hours wore on, her body already pushed to its limits by days of travel, protesting each additional step. When she stumbled for the third time, Maheo silently moved to walk beside her, occasionally steadying her with a hand at her elbow when her footing faltered. Near midnight, they reached what Hototo called the Hidden Valley, a narrow passage between parallel ridges concealed by dense growth at either end. Here, finally, they stopped to rest. The location offered natural protection from both the elements and observation, with high ground providing vantage points in all directions. Clara sank to the ground, muscles trembling with exhaustion. Hototo disappeared briefly, returning with a handful of berries and roots he'd gathered along their route. "Eat," he instructed. "Give strength." Too tired to question, Clara ate mechanically, barely tasting the bitter roots and tart berries. When she'd finished, Hototo offered her his water skin, the cool liquid reviving her slightly. "How much farther to the healing grounds?" she asked, dreading the answer. "We will reach by tomorrow nightfall, if no trouble comes," Hototo replied. The conditional phrase hung in the air like a premonition. Thus far, trouble had been their constant companion, and Clara saw no reason to expect that to change. "Rest now," Maheo advised. 2 hours only, then move again." Clara didn't need to be told twice. She curled on her side in the soft grass, using her arm as a pillow. Sleep claimed her almost instantly, dragging her into fathomless darkness, untouched by dreams. It felt like mere seconds later when Maheo's hand on her shoulder jolted her awake. The night was still deep around them, stars wheeling overhead in their eternal procession. "Time to move," he said quietly. Hototo heard something. Instantly alert, despite her bone-deep fatigue, Clara scrambled to her feet. The hunters? Not. "Sure, but we take no chances." They departed the hidden valley with greater urgency than before, Hototo leading them along a route that seemed deliberately chosen to avoid open ground. The hours blurred together in Clara's exhausted mind, walking, resting briefly, walking again. Dawn found them traversing a dense oak forest that offered welcome concealment from searching eyes. As morning light filtered through the canopy above, Hototo suddenly halted, raising his hand in a silent signal. Maheo pulled Clara behind the broad trunk of an ancient oak, his body tense with alertness. For long moments they remained motionless, barely breathing. Then Clara heard what had alerted Hototo. Voices in the distance, the distinctive cadence of English rather than any native language. "Tracks end here, like they vanished into the air." That's impossible. Nobody just disappears. You said you were the best tracker Fort Collins had. I am. But these ain't normal Indians we're tracking. These are ghosts. Cheyenne medicine? Men. They know tricks no other tribe uses. The voices grew clearer as the speakers moved unwittingly closer to their hiding place. Through gaps in the underbrush, Clara caught glimpses of the hunting party, 5 men, all armed, led by a weather-beaten individual in a battered cavalry hat who must be the tracker. Harrison's offering $100 for the nurse, one voice said. Plus, whatever bounty the army adds for the Indians. Good money for one sickly female, another countered. If she's still alive, could these savages have already killed her? Nah, Harrison says the Indian who took her is known for collecting white captives. Keep them like pets or something. She'll be alive. The casual discussion of her fate, as an object to be sold, a captive to be rescued, a pet to be collected, sent a wave of fury through Clara's exhaustion. These men knew nothing of her reality, nothing of Maheo's honor or Hototo's wisdom. Their ignorance would have been laughable if it weren't so dangerous. The tracker's voice cut through her thoughts. Fresh sign here. Small footprint. Could be. The woman's. Clara's breath caught. She glanced down at her feet, suddenly remembering the soft ground they'd crossed earlier, still damp from recent rains. Had she left tracks visible enough for the experienced tracker to follow? Maheo's hand tightened on her shoulder, a silent command to remain absolutely still. Beside them, Hototo had drawn a knife with such subtle movement that Clara hadn't even noticed until the blade caught a stray sunbeam. Which way? Demanded a new voice, deeper, rougher, and horribly familiar. Clara's heart seemed to stop. Dr. Alexander Harrison was there, just yards away, separated only by undergrowth and tree trunks. Heading east, looks like, the tracker replied. But the sign is hours old. They're moving fast for people on foot. Then we move faster, Harrison growled. I want my nurse back before those savages reach their camp. Once she's there, we'll never get her out. The naked possessiveness in his voice turned Clara's blood cold. This was not professional concern. It was the fury of a man whose career hung in the balance. Spread out, Harrison ordered. 5-yard intervals. Move east. Eyes sharp for any sign. The hunting party began to deploy, their movements creating a sweeping line that would inevitably discover Clara and her companions if they remained in place. Hototo exchanged a swift glance with Maheo, some silent communication passing between them. In one fluid motion, Hototo rose and slipped away, moving with such stealth that not even the dry leaves beneath his feet betrayed his passage. Clara watched, in disbelief, as he deliberately crossed the path ahead of the approaching hunters, leaving just enough sign to be noticeable before disappearing into the forest to the north. The tracker spotted the movement almost immediately. There! Movement to the north! The hunting party's attention instantly shifted, their line reforming to pursue the new lead. Within moments, they had changed direction, crashing through the underbrush with none of Hototo's grace or stealth. Come, Maheo whispered, urging Clara to her feet. Hototo leads them away. We go east, quickly. Understanding dawned. Hototo had deliberately exposed himself, becoming the decoy that would allow Clara and Maheo to escape. The selfless act stunned her, coming from a man who had known her less than a day. Will he be safe? She asked as they moved rapidly in the opposite direction from the hunters. Hototo knows these woods better than he knows his own hands, Maheo assured her. He will lead them in circles until nightfall, then rejoin us at healing grounds. They traveled with renewed urgency, Clara pushing through her exhaustion with grim determination. Harrison's voice echoed in her mind, fueling her resolve with each step. Whatever future awaited her at the healing grounds, it had to be better than returning to a man who viewed her only as a liability to his career. As they pressed eastward, the forest gradually thinned, giving way to scattered groves separated by meadows bright with late wildflowers. In another time, Another life. Clara might have found the landscape beautiful. Now she saw only the lack of cover, the exposure that made them vulnerable. "We are close now," Maheo said as midday approached. "1 hour more, perhaps 2. Clara nodded, saving her breath for the journey. Each step was an act of defiance now, against Harrison, against the fate he'd planned for her, against the limitations he'd always imposed on her abilities. Behind them, faintly but unmistakably, came the sound that confirmed her worst fears, the report of a rifle shot echoing across the open land. The threat had just escalated beyond measure. The rifle shot echoed across the open meadow, followed by another in quick succession. Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. Maheo gripped her arm, pulling her toward a stand of cottonwoods at the meadow's edge. "Was that—" she began, unable to complete the question. "Hototo would not fire," Maheo said grimly. "He leads, does not engage." The implication was clear. The hunters had either fired at Hototo or were signaling to each other. Neither possibility boded well for their safety. They reached the shelter of the trees as a third shot rang out, more distant this time. Maheo studied the terrain ahead, his expression unreadable but his posture radiating tension. "We cannot cross open ground now," he decided. "Too exposed. We go along the creek." Clara followed his gaze to a line of trees in the distance that marked a watercourse, a small creek that snaked eastward through the rolling landscape. The route would be less direct, but would offer continuous cover. "Will it still lead to healing grounds?" she asked. "Yes. Takes a longer path, but safer." He glanced at the sky, calculating. "We reach by nightfall if there are no more delays." They set off at a brisk pace, staying within the tree line as they made their way toward the creek. The distant gunshots had ceased, leaving an ominous silence in their wake. Clara's legs ached with each step, but fear proved a powerful motivator, pushing her beyond what she'd believed herself capable of just days earlier. When they reached the creek, little more than a wide stream at this point in its course, Maheo led them into the shallow water itself. "Walk in water," he instructed. "Leave no tracks." The autumn-cooled water numbed Clara's feet as they waded upstream, her buckskin moccasins offering little protection against the cold. Still, she recognized the wisdom of the strategy. Even the skilled tracker from Fort Collins would struggle to follow a trail that vanished at the creek bank. They traveled this way for nearly an hour, sometimes in the water, sometimes along the muddy bank, when fallen trees or deep pools blocked their path. Clara's sodden dress clung to her legs, the weight of it dragging at her already depleted energy. "I see something," she whispered suddenly, pointing ahead. Through the trees, a thin column of smoke rose against the blue sky. Maheo nodded, his tension visibly easing. "Healing grounds. We are here." They followed the creek around a final bend, and Clara caught her first glimpse of their destination. In a natural clearing surrounded by ancient cottonwoods stood a collection of structures, some traditional teepees, others more permanent wooden cabins with bark roofs. The settlement nestled in a sheltered valley where the creek widened into a small pond before continuing eastward. People moved among the structures, women carrying water or tending to cooking fires, children playing near the pond's edge. A group of men working on what appeared to be a new cabin frame. It wasn't large, perhaps 20 dwellings in total, but to Clara's exhausted eyes it represented salvation. Maheo let out a distinctive call, alerting the camp to their approach. Figures paused in their activities, turning toward the sound. A group detached from the main encampment, moving up the path toward them. Clara suddenly felt acutely conscious of her bedraggled appearance, her dress torn and mud-stained, her hair a tangled mess, her face scratched and dirty from days of wilderness travel. She was about to meet an entire community in this state, and would be judged on these first impressions. Maheo seemed to sense her concern. "They will see beyond appearance," he assured her. They will see the healer who survived abandonment, who walked for days through unknown lands, who faced hunters without flinching. He paused. They will see what I see, one who belongs if she chooses to. The simple statement cut through Clara's anxiety. She straightened her shoulders and lifted, her chin ready to face whatever reception awaited her. The people approaching were not the savages from settler nightmares, but individuals with their own stories, their own reasons for being here. In the approaching group, Clara recognized a familiar figure, Hototo, walking with a slight limp, but otherwise whole. Beside him walked an older woman with grey-streaked hair and an authoritative bearing. Behind them came several others, including a bearded white man, whose appearance startled Clara with its incongruity. As the groups converged on the path, Clara felt a curious sense of completion, as if a circle begun days ago when Maheo found her by the creek was finally closing. Whatever came next would be the beginning of a new circle, a new story, one she would help write rather than merely endure. Hototo raised his hand in greeting, his weathered face creasing in a smile that transformed his stern features. "Welcome," he said simply, "to those who choose freedom." The choice, Clara realized, was explicit rather than implied. Even now, standing at the threshold of the healing grounds, she was being offered agency, the power to decide her own path forward. She met Hototo's gaze steadily, then looked to Maheo, who watched her with quiet anticipation. In that moment, her decision crystallized with perfect clarity. "I choose freedom," she replied, her voice strong despite her exhaustion. "I choose to stay." The simple declaration marked not the end of her journey, but its true beginning. The bearded white man stepped forward, studying her with keen blue eyes. "I'm David," he said, extending his hand, "once Dr. David Carlyle of Boston, now David Running River of nowhere and everywhere." Clara took his hand, momentarily speechless at meeting the legendary surgeon whose disappearance had shocked the medical community. Clara Bennett, nurse with the Army Medical Corps. She hesitated. "Former nurse, I suppose?" David's eyes moved to the telltale pustules on her arm, now more pronounced. "Smallpox," he noted. "Early stage. How long?" 5 days since first symptoms," Clara replied automatically, falling into the familiar rhythm of medical assessment. He nodded. "Good. We can help. Come." Clara was led through the encampment, aware of curious eyes following her progress. Some faces showed open welcome, others maintained a polite distance, and a few regarded her with undisguised suspicion, exactly as Maheo had predicted. The older woman who had walked with Hototo introduced herself as Singing Grass, the camp's head healer. She led Clara to a small cabin set apart from the others, near a bubbling spring. "Healing lodge," she explained. "You stay here first. Treat sickness, then join others." The interior was surprisingly well equipped for a frontier healing space. Shelves lined the walls, holding clay pots of herbs, rolled bandages, and glass bottles of various tinctures. A fire burned in a central stone hearth, and pallets covered with clean furs were arranged around the perimeter. "Sit," Singing Grass instructed, pointing to a wooden stool near the fire. "Must clean you, then medicine." Too exhausted to protest, Clara sank onto the stool. David Running River and Maheo conferred quietly near the doorway while Singing Grass prepared a steaming basin of water infused with fragrant herbs. "Remove the dress," the older woman said matter-of-factly. "Too dirty for healing." Clara hesitated, glancing at the men. Understanding her discomfort, they stepped outside without comment. With Singing Grass's help, Clara peeled off her filthy, sodden uniform. The older woman made a sympathetic sound when she saw the extent of the smallpox pustules, now spreading across Clara's arms and beginning on her torso. Singing Grass bathed her with gentle efficiency, using soft cloths and the herb-infused water. The warm moisture felt heavenly on Clara's skin, washing away days of grime and fear. When she was clean, singing grass provided a soft buckskin dress to wear, helping Clara pull it over her head. "Now, medicine," she announced, calling the men. "Back in." What followed was unlike any medical treatment Clara had witnessed in her years of nursing. David, Singing Grass, and Maheo worked together in a seamless integration of Western and native healing practices. David examined her professionally, checking her pulse and temperature, while Singing Grass prepared a dark liquid in a clay cup. "Bark tea," David explained, "willow for fever, elder for pustules. We've had success combining this with my medical training." Maheo, meanwhile, arranged a series of smooth stones in a circle around the hearth, each stone bearing a painted symbol Clara didn't recognize. He placed herbs on each stone, which released aromatic smoke as they heated. "Purification," he said, noticing her curious gaze. "Healing is for spirit and body together." Clara drank the bitter tea obediently, surprised to find immediate relief from the fever that had been building throughout the day. Then David applied a green salve to each pustule with meticulous care. "Pine, resin, yarrow, and other herbs I'm still learning to identify," he told her with a wry smile. "Works better than anything I used at Massachusetts General." As they worked, Clara found herself asking the question that had burned in her mind since learning of his presence here. "Why did you leave? You were one of the most respected surgeons in Boston." David's hands stilled momentarily. "I came west with the army after the war, saw how the military doctors treated the native populations, at best with neglect, at worst with deliberate harm." His voice hardened. "I was ordered to withhold treatment from a Cheyenne village suffering from influenza. Let it run its course," my commanding officer said. "Fewer hostiles to deal with." Clara nodded, understanding all too well. "Dr. Harrison said the same about the Arapaho with smallpox." "I couldn't be part of it," David continued. "I deserted, intending to treat the village myself. Maheo's father found me, brought me here. I've been learning and teaching ever since." His blue eyes met hers directly. "I didn't leave medicine, Clara. I found its true meaning." The treatment continued for over an hour. By the end, Clara's fever had diminished noticeably, and the angry red pustules had begun to flatten and dry. More importantly, the bone-deep exhaustion that had plagued her for days seemed to lift, replaced by a tentative sense of well-being. "Rest now," Singing Grass instructed, guiding her to one of the pallets. "Sleep brings healing." Clara didn't need to be told twice. She sank onto the soft furs, their warmth enveloping her tired limbs. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Maheo arranging more herbs on the hearthstones, his movements deliberate and focused, his lips moving. In what might have been prayer, she slept deeply, dreamlessly, for what felt like days, but was in fact just one night. When she woke, sunlight streamed through the lodge's small window, and she was alone, save for a young Cheyenne woman tending the fire. "I am Willow," the girl said shyly when she noticed Clara was awake. "Singing Grass says you should eat." She offered a wooden bowl of rich, fragrant stew. Clara sat up, surprised to find her strength returning, the fever greatly diminished. She ate eagerly. The stew's hearty flavor, satisfying a hunger she hadn't realized, was so intense. "Thank you," she said when she'd finished. "How long did I sleep?" "One sun," Willow replied. "Maheo says your spirit was tired, needed to heal." Clara touched her arm, feeling the pustules. They had dried significantly, forming scabs rather than the fluid-filled blisters that typically marked this stage of smallpox. "The medicine is working," she marveled. Willow nodded. "Singing Grass is a powerful healer, David Running River too. Together, stronger." She hesitated. "You are a healer also. From white people's place?" "Yes," Clara said. "I was a nurse. I treated sick people, helped doctors. You will teach me? The question was asked with such earnest hope that Clara was momentarily taken aback. I learn from singing grass, but she says more knowledge is good. David teaches some, but he is often away at other camps. Yes, of course, Clara stammered. If I'm allowed to stay. Council decides tonight, Willow informed her. You speak to them when the sun touches mountains. She touched Clara's hand briefly. I hope you stay. We need more healers. Throughout the day, various members of the community visited the healing lodge to observe or assist with Clara's treatment. David returned to apply more of the green salve, explaining each herb's properties with the precision of a medical lecture. The people here have accumulated generations of knowledge about local plants, he told her. I've been documenting everything, combining it with modern medical understanding. His eyes lit with enthusiasm. Imagine what we could learn if we approached native healing with respect rather than dismissal. Singing Grass taught her the proper way to prepare the bark tea, showing her how to identify the correct inner layer of willow bark and the precise amount of elderberry to add for maximum efficacy. The older woman was stern but patient, correcting Clara's technique with firm hands and approving nods when she got it right. By late afternoon, Clara felt well enough to venture outside, supported by Willow on one side and a walking stick provided. By Singing Grass, the healing grounds revealed themselves fully in the golden light of approaching sunset, a harmonious blend of traditions from different tribes, each contributing to the whole. Children played near the creek, supervised by elders who taught them to weave baskets from reeds. Women worked at hide-stretching frames or tended communal cooking fires. Men returned from hunting parties or worked on construction and repair of the more permanent structures. Several people paused in their tasks to observe Clara, their expressions ranging from curiosity to caution. They wonder about you, Willow explained. White healer who walks with Maheo. Clara spotted Maheo across the clearing, deep in conversation, with Hototo and several other men she didn't recognize. He glanced up, catching her eye, and inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement before returning to his discussion. He speaks for you at council, Willow said, following her gaze. Says you have healer's heart, warrior's courage. Clara felt a rush of gratitude toward Maheo, followed by apprehension about the upcoming council meeting. What if they decided she couldn't stay? Where would she go? Back to the army, where Harrison would ensure she was disgraced. To Boston, where her family had made it clear they considered her career choice shameful. Willow led her to a flat rock beside the creek, where they sat watching the water flow past. Tell me about white people's healing ways, the girl requested. How do you stop bleeding? How do you treat broken bones? Grateful for the distraction, Clara began explaining basic first aid procedures. Willow proved an apt pupil, asking insightful questions and comparing the techniques to Cheyenne methods. Soon they were joined by two other young women, introduced as Sparrow and Morning Light, who listened with equal interest. As the sun approached the western mountains, casting long shadows across the healing grounds, David appeared to escort Clara to the council lodge. The largest structure in the camp, it stood at the center of the clearing, its entrance facing east. Ready? He asked, offering his arm for support. Clara took a deep breath, smoothing the front of her borrowed buckskin dress. What should I expect? They'll ask you direct questions. Answer honestly. They value truth above all. He smiled encouragingly. Remember, I went through this too. They're fair, even if they seem stern. The council lodge was already filled when they entered. Elders and representatives from the various tribal groups within the camp sat in a circle, around a central fire pit. Clara recognized Singing Grass, Hototo, and several others she'd met during the day. Maheo sat slightly apart, his role apparently that of advocate rather than judge. An elderly man with a deeply lined face and snow-white braids addressed the gathering in Cheyenne. Many winters speak for the council, David translated quietly. He asks that truth alone be spoken in this circle. The formality of the proceedings impressed Clara. This was no hasty frontier justice, but a deliberate process with established protocols and evident respect for due consideration. Many Winters turned to Clara, switching to heavily accented but comprehensible English. "You are this woman Bennett from White People's Healing Place?" "Yes," Clara confirmed, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "My name is Clara Bennett, formerly a nurse with the Army Medical Corps." "Tell your story," Many Winters instructed. "From the beginning." With simple, unembellished language, Clara recounted her training as a nurse, her decision to serve in the Western Territories despite her family's disapproval, and her assignment to Dr. Harrison's unit. She described the smallpox outbreak at the Arapaho settlement, her own infection, and Harrison's abandonment. She explained his subsequent pursuit, driven by fear for his career rather than concern for her welfare. Throughout her narrative, she was careful to distinguish fact from interpretation, to present events as they had occurred without emotional embellishment. When she finished, silence filled the lodge. Many Winters studied her for a long moment, his ancient eyes seeming to look beyond her physical presence to something deeper. "You speak without hatred," he observed. "Your doctor betrayed his healing oath, yet you do not call for vengeance." "Hatred would only continue what he began," Clara replied. "I want to end it, not extend it." The old man nodded, approval evident in his expression, wisdom in one so young. He turned to address the council in Cheyenne again, sparking a discussion that Clara couldn't follow. Occasionally, someone would gesture toward her or ask a question that David would translate quietly. "They're concerned about your smallpox," he murmured at one point, "wondering if you pose a risk to the camp." "Tell them I understand their concern," Clara replied. "In my experience, once the pustules begin to dry, the risk of contagion decreases significantly. But I'll remain isolated, if they prefer." David relayed this, which seemed to satisfy some of the more skeptical council members. Finally, Many Winters raised his hand, silencing the discussion. He turned back to Clara, his weathered face solemn. "The council has decided," he announced. "You may stay among us, not as guests or prisoners, but as one in training to become part of our healing circle." Relief flooded through Clara, so intense she felt momentarily lightheaded. "You will learn our ways, our medicines, our skills for survival," the old man continued. "In return, you will share your knowledge of white people's healing that may help us treat our sickness. This is a fair exchange." "It is more than fair," Clara agreed, bowing her head in gratitude. "There is more," Many Winters added. "Your doctor," Clara looked up sharply. "What about him?" "He lives. He still searches." The old man's expression grew grave. "Such a man does not easily accept defeat. He may return with more men, with soldiers perhaps." The possibility had haunted Clara's thoughts since arriving at the healing grounds. Harrison's pride would not allow him to simply accept her loss, especially not to people he considered inferior. His hatred of indigenous peoples had been a constant. Throughout their work together, a poisonous contempt that had only worsened with each passing month. "Yes," she acknowledged, "he will try again." "Then we must be prepared," Many Winters declared. "Not just to defend, but to end this threat permanently." He surveyed the council members. "We have lived in the shadows too long, moving like ghosts to avoid notice. Perhaps it is time for more direct action." A murmur of agreement circulated through the lodge. Clara sensed a shift in the atmosphere, a move from reactive to proactive planning that both alarmed and intrigued her. "What kind of action?" she asked hesitantly. Maheo stepped forward, addressing both Clara and the council. "Your doctor believes you captive, not free by choice. He will gather men, perhaps petition the army at Fort Collins for assistance in rescuing. A white healer from savages," his voice hardened. Such rescue would mean death for many here. We cannot allow soldiers to discover this place. So we must strike first, Hototo added, before he brings the blue coats. The girl should not be involved in this planning, an elder objected. She is still of white blood, still carries the spotted sickness. No, Clara interjected before Maheo could defend her. I haven't been Alexander Harrison's nurse since the moment he abandoned me to die. She straightened her shoulders, meeting the skeptical gazes directly. I know Harrison better than anyone here. I know how he thinks, what he fears, how he will plan. If you're going to confront him, my knowledge could mean the difference between success and disaster. Her words hung in the lodge's smoky air, their impact visible on the faces surrounding her. Even those who had regarded her with suspicion seemed to reassess her in light of this clear declaration of allegiance. Many Winters studied her with those ancient, knowing eyes. Would you help plan action against your own people? Harrison abandoned his claim to me when he left me to die, Clara replied steadily. I choose my own people now. The simple declaration resonated throughout the lodge. After a moment of silence, many Winters nodded slowly. It is decided. The healer woman joins our council on this matter. He looked around the circle. Who will lead this action? Maheo stepped forward. I found her. I brought her here. I will finish what her doctor started. Not alone, Clara stated firmly, rising to stand beside him. I'm coming with you. A ripple of protest moved through the council, but Clara remained resolute. I don't mean to fight, she clarified, but my presence is essential if we're to resolve this without bloodshed. Harrison needs to see me, to hear from my own lips that I choose to be here. Too dangerous, Maheo objected. Your doctor is not a rational man. Exactly why I must go, Clara countered. He won't believe anyone else. Only seeing me, hearing me directly has any chance of ending this without violence. The council debated her proposal vigorously, weighing the risks against the potential benefits. Eventually, a compromise emerged. Clara would accompany the party that confronted Harrison, but would remain safely distant until her presence could make a difference rather than provoke immediate violence. As the council session concluded, Clara stepped out of the lodge into the crisp autumn air. The healing grounds continued its daily activities around her, children playing, women working hides, men repairing weapons and tools. Yet she perceived it all differently now. This was no longer a temporary refuge, but the beginning of a new life, one she had chosen rather than had thrust upon her. David joined her, his expression thoughtful. You surprised many today, he observed, speaking so strongly in council. I surprised myself, Clara admitted. A week ago, I could barely contradict Harrison during rounds, let alone stand up to him directly. Now I'm planning to confront him face to face. Hardship reveals true nature, David said, like fire showing gold hidden in rock. Clara considered this metaphor, finding truth in it. The ordeal of her abandonment and journey had burned away pretense and obligation, revealing a core strength she hadn't known she possessed. When do we leave? She asked. 3 days, David replied. Scouts first locate Harrison, learn his plans. Then we move. Clara nodded, already mentally preparing for the confrontation to come. He'll be at Fort Collins, drinking at the officers' club and gathering men for another attempt. That's his pattern. Drink for courage, then act. The next 3 days passed, in a blur of preparation and continued healing. Clara's smallpox, treated with the combined wisdom of Western and native medicine, improved dramatically. The pustules dried and began to fall away, leaving pink marks that would fade with time, rather than the deep, disfiguring scars typical of the disease. She spent hours with singing grass and willow, learning the preparation of herbal remedies, while sharing her knowledge of surgical techniques and wound management. David taught her to ride properly, a skill she would need for the journey to Fort Collins. Maheo showed her how to move silently through forest and field, how to observe without being observed. Each night, the planning council met to refine their strategy. Scouts returned with increasingly detailed reports. Harrison had indeed established himself at Fort Collins, but thus far had failed to convince the Army command to provide troops for a rescue mission. The post commander, skeptical of Harrison's claims, had declared it a civilian matter. Frustrated but undeterred, Harrison had begun recruiting mercenaries from among the settlement's less reputable inhabitants. 8 men, Swift River reported, on the eve of their departure. Armed, paid with promise of Army reward money, they believed the story of savage kidnappers. The final plan was elegant in its simplicity. They would intercept Harrison's party before it could reach the wilderness trail leading toward the healing grounds. The confrontation would occur on open ground where Clara could be clearly seen, demonstrating she was neither captive nor coerced. If Harrison could be made to understand that his false narrative would not stand, perhaps bloodshed could be avoided. If not, Clara preferred not to dwell on the alternative. Dawn broke cold and clear over the plains as the small party departed. The healing grounds. Clara rode beside Maheo, her posture reflecting the intensive training of recent days. Though still a novice rider, she managed her mount with growing confidence, the connection between horse and rider strengthening with each mile. They traveled in silence, each lost in private thoughts about the confrontation ahead. The warriors who accompanied them, Hototo, Swift River, and 3 others Clara had come to know during her time in camp, maintained a vigilant watch on the surrounding terrain, alert for any sign of Harrison's men or other potential threats. When they reached the final ridge overlooking the prairie where the interception would occur, Maheo called a halt. The vast, open space lay spread before them, a natural arena for the confrontation to come. "We divide now," Maheo instructed. "Each position as planned." The warriors nodded acknowledgement before departing in different directions, moving with the practiced stealth that would allow them to surround Harrison's party undetected. Only David remained with Clara and Maheo, studying her with characteristic intensity. "Last chance to change your mind," he offered. "No shame in choosing a safer path." Clara shook her head decisively. "This ends today, one way or another." David nodded, accepting her determination. "Remember the plan. You speak only when Maheo signals. Stay behind us until a safe approach." "I remember," Clara assured him. "I'm ready." They descended toward the prairie, taking position behind a low rise that offered concealment while providing a clear view of the trail Harrison's party would follow. As they waited, Clara found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment, from abandoned nurse to accepted member of a healing community, from passive victim to active participant in her own salvation. The waiting stretched for hours, the sun climbing toward its zenith, then beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon. Just as Clara began to wonder if the scouts had somehow misread Harrison's intentions, Maheo tensed beside her. "They come," he murmured, pointing toward a dust cloud rising in the distance. Clara's heart quickened as she made out the approaching riders, 9 men, Harrison's distinctive tall figure in the lead. They rode with the confidence of those who believed themselves hunters rather than potential prey, making no attempt at stealth or caution. As the party drew nearer, Maheo gave a signal, a bird call so natural that Clara would have missed its significance if she hadn't been watching for it. Within moments, answering calls came from different directions around the prairie. Harrison's group halted, suddenly alert to potential danger. "Now," Maheo said, rising to his full height atop the rise, clearly visible to the riders below. David stood beside him, his bearded white face guaranteed to draw attention. Clara remained hidden as planned, watching as confusion rippled through Harrison's men. The doctor urged his horse forward a few paces, hand moving to the revolver at His belt, Carlyle. Harrison's incredulous voice carried clearly across the distance. David Carlyle, you're supposed to be dead. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, David called back, his Boston accent suddenly more pronounced. Though I do go by the running river these days. Harrison's face contorted with a mixture of shock and disgust. Gone native, have? You, and harboring my nurse, I hear. That's a federal offense, Carlyle. Is abandonment of medical personnel during an epidemic also a federal offense? David countered, or just a violation of every oath we took? A red flush crept up Harrison's neck. I did what was necessary to protect my unit. The girl was already infected, as good as dead. Yet here I stand, very much alive, Clara said, rising to take her place between Maheo and David. The sight of her, healthy, composed, and clearly unrestrained, visibly startled Harrison. He had clearly expected to find her, if at all, in a much worse condition. Clara, he recovered quickly, his voice shifting to a tone of false concern. Thank God we've found you. These savages have clearly addled your mind. Come now, we're taking you back to Fort Collins. Clara met his gaze steadily. I'm not going anywhere with you, Dr. Harrison. I'm exactly where I choose to be. Harrison's false solicitude vanished like morning mist. Don't be ridiculous, girl. You're coming with us, if I have to drag you back myself. He turned to his men. Spread out. There are more Indians around. Find them. The mercenaries hesitated, glancing between Harrison and the three figures on the rise. Before they could act, warriors emerged from concealment around the prairies. Perimeter, not threatening, merely revealing their presence and their numbers. Your men are surrounded, Maheo stated calmly. But we do not seek blood, only the truth. Harrison's hand tightened on his revolver. The army will hear about this. A white woman, a white doctor, held captive by savages. They'll send troops. Burn your village to the ground. And who will they believe, Clara asked. The army doctor who abandoned his nurse during a smallpox outbreak? Or the nurse who survived to tell the tale? Uncertainty flickered across Harrison's face. Clara pressed her advantage. What do you think the medical inspector from Washington will say when he hears you left me behind? When he reviews your records and finds you falsified reports of my death? When he learns you hired mercenaries to silence me? It's your word against mine, Harrison blustered, but the confidence had drained from his voice. And mine, David added. Dr. David Carlyle, graduate of Harvard Medical School, former chief surgeon of the 20th Massachusetts Regiment. My reputation may have faded, but my name still carries weight in certain circles. Harrison's men exchanged uneasy glances, clearly reassessing the situation. They had signed on to rescue a captive nurse, not to confront a renowned surgeon and a clearly non-captive woman backed by well-armed warriors. What do you want? Harrison finally asked, the question directed at Clara. I want you to leave us in peace, she replied simply. Return to Fort Collins. Tell them I died of smallpox if you must, but end this pursuit. And if I refuse? Then I ride to Fort Collins by myself, Clara countered. I tell the commander how you abandoned me, how you tried to silence me, how you've wasted army resources on a personal vendetta. Fear flickered in Harrison's eyes. Fear for his career, his reputation, his future. Clara recognized the calculation. Behind that fear, the weighing of options and potential outcomes. She means it, Harrison, David said quietly, and I'll ride with her. 2 medical professionals, with very compelling testimonies. A tense silence fell over the prairie. The mercenaries shifted uneasily in their saddles, clearly unwilling to die for Harrison's cause, now that its true nature had been revealed. Even the most prejudiced among them could see that Clara was neither captive nor coerced. Stand down, one of the men finally said. This ain't what you told us, Doc. You said she was kidnapped, not that you left her to die. Shut up, Harrison snapped, but the damage was done. The fragile alliance of his makeshift rescue party was crumbling before his eyes. Clara watched the man she had once respected, once feared, diminish before her. Without his authority, without his uniform, without his willing subordinates, Alexander Harrison was revealed as what he had always been, a bully sustained by systems that rewarded his cruelty. "It's over, Harrison," she said, not unkindly. "Go back to Fort Collins, submit your resignation, return east, start again." For a moment Clara thought he might accept the offered mercy, the chance to retreat with some dignity intact. Then his face hardened, his hand tightening on his revolver. "I won't be dictated to by a nurse and a traitor," he snarled, drawing his weapon in one swift motion and aiming it directly at Clara. Several things happened simultaneously. Maheo moved to shield Clara with his body. David lunged toward Harrison. The surrounding warriors raised their weapons, and a single shot rang out across the prairie. Harrison's revolver fell from suddenly nerveless fingers. He stared in disbelief at the blossoming red stain on his chest, then at the mercenary who had fired the shot. "Nobody threatens a healer," the man said grimly, lowering his rifle. "Not in my presence. Not even you, Doc." Harrison slumped forward in his saddle, eyes wide with shock rather than pain. Within moments his body slid to the ground, and he was gone, a victim of his own hatred and the violence he had cultivated. A heavy silence descended on the prairie. The remaining mercenaries stared at their fallen leader, then at the man who had shot him. No one moved to retaliate. No one spoke in protest. The justice of the frontier, harsh but clear, had been served. Clara felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a profound weariness and a strange sense of closure. The man who had abandoned her was gone, but his death brought no joy. It merely ended a chapter that needed to end, allowing the next to begin. "What now?" one of the mercenaries asked, breaking the silence. "Now you return to Fort Collins," David answered, stepping forward to take charge of the situation. "Tell them Harrison's obsession led to his death. Tell them the nurse perished from smallpox days ago, as she would have without intervention. Tell them whatever truth lets this matter rest." The men nodded, seemingly relieved to have direction. The one who had fired the fatal shot dismounted to retrieve Harrison's body, lashing it across his own horse with practiced efficiency. "I didn't sign on to hunt innocent women," he said gruffly to Clara, "especially not healers. My ma was a midwife before the fever took her." Clara acknowledged this with a quiet nod. "Thank you." As the mercenaries prepared to depart, their erstwhile mission abandoned, Clara felt a chapter of her life closing definitively. The ties that had bound her to her former life, to the army, to conventional medicine, to the expectations of her Boston upbringing, were severed completely. Before her stretched a new path, uncertain but chosen freely. The journey back to the healing grounds was conducted in reflective silence. Even the usually vigilant warriors seemed lost in private thoughts. Only when they created the final ridge overlooking the valley did Maheo speak. "You stood firm," he observed, "faced your enemy without flinching." "He wasn't my enemy," Clara replied thoughtfully. "Just a man trapped by his own fears and prejudices. In the end, I pitied him more than I feared him." Maheo studied her with new appreciation. This is wisdom few find so young. As they descended into the valley, Clara was struck by how quickly the healing grounds had come to feel like home. Children ran to greet the returning party. Elders emerged from their lodges, and Singing Grass stood waiting at the center of the clearing, her lined face serene with foreknowledge. "It is finished," the old healer stated rather than asked. "Yes," Clara confirmed. "It's finished," Singing Grass nodded, satisfied. "Then new work begins. Come." She led Clara to the healing lodge, where 3 patients awaited. A young hunter with a deep gash in his leg, a child with fever, and an elder struggling to breathe. Without hesitation, Clara washed her hands in the herb-infused water and set to work. applying the skills of her training enhanced by the wisdom she had gained in this place. David joined her, and together they treated each patient, Clara's precise surgical technique closing the hunter's wound, while David prepared a poultice of herbs that would prevent infection. Her gentle examination diagnosed the child's ailment as simple influenza rather than something more serious, while David mixed a tea of white willow bark to ease the fever. For the elder, Clara recognized the wheezing of bronchitis and showed David how to position the patient to ease breathing while they administered a steam treatment infused with pine and sage. Throughout the afternoon, others from the camp came to observe or assist, Willow eager to learn each procedure, Maheo bringing fresh herbs as needed, many winters offering quiet encouragement to the suffering elderly. It was a community effort, each person contributing according to their abilities, each patient receiving care regardless of status or origin. As sunset painted the valley in golden light, Clara stepped outside to catch her breath and found Maheo waiting. They walked together to the creek's edge, watching as the water reflected the changing colors of the sky. "You have found your place," he observed. Clara considered this. 6 days ago, she had been abandoned to die. Now she stood as part of a healing community, her skills valued, her presence accepted, her future determined by her own choices rather than others' expectations. "I have," she agreed, "though I still have much to learn." "As do we all," Maheo replied. "This is the way of balance, always teaching, always learning." They stood in companionable silence as stars began to appear overhead. Clara thought of the journey that had brought her here, the hardship, the fear, the courage it had required. She thought of Harrison and felt a moment of genuine gratitude toward the man whose cruelty had inadvertently led her to this place of belonging. "The land remembers," she murmured, echoing the words that had connected her to Maheo in the beginning. "Yes," he agreed. "And now it will remember you, Clara Bennett, not as you were, but as you have become." As darkness fell completely, lanterns were lit around the healing grounds, casting warm pools of light that invited community and connection. From the central fire pit, the sound of singing rose, Arapaho voices blending with Cheyenne, Ute harmonizing with Kiowa, even David's deep baritone joining in songs whose words he was still learning. Clara didn't understand the lyrics, but she recognized the melody of belonging, of welcome, of home finally found. Tomorrow would bring new patience, new challenges, new opportunities to blend what she knew with what she was learning. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Prejudice and misunderstanding didn't disappear in a single day, but it would be hers to walk, step by step. She had been abandoned during a smallpox outbreak, left to die by those who should have protected her. Instead, that abandonment had become the first step on a journey toward her true calling, her authentic self. As Maheo had said, hardship had revealed the gold hidden within the rock of her being. Clara lifted her face to the star-filled sky, feeling the cool autumn breeze against her skin. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she was exactly where she was meant to be, and that made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.